Manjusiha, you've just done a fabulous session at Transforming Self and World.
Thank you.
The topic was on race in the sangha.
Yeah.
To me, it felt like it was really important in opening up a discussion. And I felt also that I don't hear that discussion enough in the community, not just in the sangha. And one of the ways you opened it up was about your own life story. I think that's important. Can you tell us a bit about that and why you started with your life story?
Thanks, Kath. Yeah, I started with my life story because it's such a big topic, really, to talk about race generally. So I just felt like that was the best way in, just to talk about my own life experience and just to look at general sort of things that came from that. So my background, I was born in East London, come from a mixed race background. So my mum, white English woman from a working class background. My dad was Nigerian. He was the eldest of 20 children. My grandfather was the chief of the clan in that particular part of Nigeria. So there was just the contrast between my mum's family and background as an only child and my dad's background. And yeah, I just thought it was a good place to start, just talking about my own experiences growing up within that family and within the UK at that time. Yeah, so and then see where that took us, really.
Yeah, and it's always a fabulous place to start, I think. And you were really frank and honest and told us about a few, well, I guess painful episodes of when you were a child, being beaten up by a boy who lived near you who didn't say it was about racism, but you knew that it was, and a few other things. So it's really useful to hear those stories. Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely important, I think, to tell those stories and to share those stories and to talk about them. They are part of our society still, and we're living through particular times. At the same time, I did want to, I feel like personally I was quite fortunate. I feel like there was a lot for me to be grateful about in my upbringing. Because in a way, with racism, the overt racism in some ways is easier to deal with in some ways. I mean, it's very, very difficult as well, of course. But it's the more covert racism, or that's sort of the background noise that's more difficult to address and identify and have a conversation about, So yeah, there were circumstances, occasional overt difficulties, and then a sort of wider context. And I just want to sort of stress as well, that I just feel very, very fortunate with my upbringing as well. The circumstances I grew up in were very, very beneficial to me as well.
And I guess you were also talking about how it was the sangha and the practice as well, and that's very beneficial.
Yeah.
And you talked about, what really struck me was you talked about how it gives you all the tools you need.
Yeah.
So how could you put that in the context of what we're talking about today?
Well, one way of talking about it is the difference between talking about my own ethics and other people's ethics. So for me, our community isn't perfect, and there's so much scope for us to be doing so much more in this area and in lots of other areas, of course. And at the same time, what I've been given since I've been part of this order, part of this movement, I've just been given indescribable riches, spiritual riches. So I feel like I've got more than enough to deepen my spiritual practice. And part of the spur I have is wanting to make that available to others. And how we make that available to others is partly there are barriers to certain people, certain groups to sort of experience the centre here or the riches that we have to offer. So how can we sort of give those gifts more widely and more fully? So there's always a sort of area where we can develop there. But in terms of me personally, I feel like I cannot repay what I've been given in terms of my spiritual life and my development as a human being. Yeah. So.
Yeah, you talked about metta and mindfulness in particular.
Yeah.
And there was someone who mentioned how they've been in the audience who had been called a racist word at some point.
Yeah.
And that really brought to mind what you'd said. That hopefully, when people are abusive in any way, that we do have more tools.
Yeah, I mean, how do we work with our enemies? How do we respond to those incredible difficulties you might encounter? I mean, what comes to mind is something I didn't mention in the talk. It's a quote from the Dalai Lama about Chairman Mao and the what is the Dalai Lama's response to Chairman Mao at the time of the invasion of Tibet, and what the Dalai Lama said was, "He is my greatest teacher." So for me personally, I find that a great inspiration. How can I take difficulty onto the path? I haven't really explained that very clearly, I don't think, but yeah.
Well, I think you did give some good thought into that during the talk, and especially when you were talking about how it's so important to run this retreat for black men. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a bit more about that and why that is important to you.
So it's really interesting talking about race and the sangha. We talk about the Buddha. So the Buddha was born in India, well, actually what's now Nepal. And Buddhism spread, many areas of Asia and the Western world and beyond. But for me, coming from a mixed race background, and partly Nigerian background, Buddhism is slowly taking root in that continent, but I've lost my thread. But
it's not. You talk about Africa in particular. It's really not. Triratna, for example, is not really very present there. But so the retreat that you want to run for black men is going to address some kind of balance, I guess, because it does feel like sometimes, particularly at the retreat centre you were talking about, there's not very many black people there. Would that be right?
I mean, one way of talking about this is in terms of visibility. So when I was growing up in Norfolk, at that time, my family we felt very, very visible. So we were the only mixed race family for most of the time I was growing up. And so when you grow up like that, as to use those words, as a visible minority, then you develop a particular sensitivity. It's just like, is this space I'm going into welcoming? Is it safe? Basically, I think for me, because I grew up in Norfolk, it's easy for me to be in spaces where there maybe aren't many other visible minorities. It's sort of like part of what I grew up with. For other people, it will be a big issue if there aren't many sort of black faces at a retreat, or if there aren't any black faces on a poster or something like that. There's a sensitivity there. I feel that sensitivity as well. So basically, it's like trying to say, with this particular retreat, it's an experiment really, just to sort of see, like, what would it be like to have a retreat for black men. There's the term people of colour, which I think is a broader term, of course. Mm-hmm. We have many people of colour within our movement and within our order. We have a very flourishing and dynamic order in India, for example, the land of the Buddha's birth. What we don't have so much is people of African origin or people of Caribbean origin. I have friends in the order from that background. It'd be lovely to see more in a way. So this is just an experiment to see, a retreat for black men, and we'll see what comes from that.
Great.
Yeah.
Was there anything else just that we haven't mentioned from the session that really stood out for you? There's anything else you particularly want to add?
Just to say, I think it takes great courage to go into this area of race. It's a very, very sensitive area, and in a way we have to sort of find ways into it. So it takes courage and sensitivity and openness. But when we can do that, basically come into focus much more for each other. There's a great opportunity to sort of get to know each other more deeply. I think it was a great session for doing that, to have those conversations, which will continue, I hope. Yeah.